Chapter 10 of Hiram Grange and the Chosen One. Hiram crept into his parents' bedroom. The floor creaked, and with each step a familiar dread filled him. Blood dripped from his mother's misshapen hands and bathed the smashed remains of the cello at her feet. She swayed drunkenly. Chapter 10 of Hiram Grange and the Chosen One. Hiram crept into his parents' bedroom. The floor creaked, and with each step a familiar dread filled him. Blood dripped from his mother's misshapen hands and bathed the smashed remains of the cello at her feet. She swayed drunkenly, her back to him. He was an adult now, all grown up. Maybe he could stop her this time. As he got closer, however, he realized something. She didn't have Father's Webley. His right hand grew heavy. He looked down, amazed at what he clutched. Shiny, new, polished to a black sheen. The Webley, as his father had always kept it. The chamber was open. Only one bullet was loaded. One for Mother. He spun the chamber. Its clicking shattered the silence. He slapped it back into place as his heart begged, "Stop this, please." Unheeding, he raised the Webley. "No!" "Hiram." Several feminine voices spoke at once. "Hiram, please." His grip tightened. The Webley shook. His mother turned, but it wasn't her, or any one person. Its face twisted into a conglomerate mess. His mother's face twisted into Sadie's, stitched into the girl from Jimmy's. It was like a madman had hacked these women apart and patched them together into one hideous being. "Hiram, please. You must let go." The gun shook in his hand. Sweat poured down his face. "No, I can't. I won't." The butchered face grimaced. "Please, Hiram, you have to. You must." "No, you can't make me." The thing lurched forward. "Do it! Now!" "No!" It leaped for him, black eyes shining. "Then die!" Hiram stood his ground. He did what he always did in the end. He pulled the trigger. Saturday morning. "No!" Hiram sat up, heart thudding. He grabbed the Webley from where it lay on the bed stand beside him and panned the room. Panic gripped him. He strained bleary eyes and aimed and imagined threats in every corner. Blinking, he tried to focus. The safe house. It was empty. Nothing was disturbed except he glanced at the open door before sliding from the bed, only then noticing he was shirtless. Foregoing a self-inspection, he crossed the room, limping only a bit. He ignored the slight twitch in his stomach. Images flashed. His stomach twisted again. A voice clamored in his head. "Something's in you, something's in you." He nudged the door wider with a foot and peered out. The hall was empty. He closed the door, locked it, and limped towards the bathroom. His mind reeled. Something wriggled in his stomach. He heard them, hissing voices, whispering in his ears and brain. Cold, razor-edged metal slid under his Adam's apple, and he froze. "Sorry for the dramatics. Wasn't sure if you'd be happy to see me. Now, be a good boy. Put the gun down and have a seat." Hiram dropped the Webley and his hands fell to his sides. He glanced down at familiar glyphs carved into the gleaming edge of the blade pressed against his neck. "I hate it when she does this." "Hello, Mab." Chapter 11. The door stood at the end of the hall. She slipped and fell on a cold floor awash in blood. Scrambling to her feet, she ran as hard as she could. The door never got closer. Something slithered behind her on wet skin. Shrill cries echoed one after another. They grated against her mind. She slipped and fell again. Sweat stung her eyes as she staggered upright once more. From the darkness, someone stepped into her path. The man from last night. There he stood, resplendent in his ridiculous suit. She raised her hands, but before she could speak, the man pulled his gun. "Sorry, love. I didn't want to do this. Honestly." The giant revolver thundered. Therese jerked awake with a cry, wrapping trembling arms around her chest. She glanced around her college flat. There were no monsters. No Reggie things staggered from her kitchen. There was nothing. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows. Everything was quiet. Reggie. Oh, God, Reggie. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Chapter 12. Hiram reclined on the bed, smoking his pipe and sipping from a now half-empty bottle of whiskey. He took a minute to enjoy the exotic beauty perched on the windsill. Only a moment, though. Based on her stiff posture, Mab wasn't in the mood for anything past business. Pity. Mab made him burn, even though he was fairly certain he hated her. She was pale-skinned, and though she possessed aristocratic features, something lewd glittered in her blue-black eyes. Like many fairy, she looked eternally 19, soft but lean in all the right places. Hiram knew better. She'd lived for centuries. No one knew how the fairy altered their appearance or achieved longevity. It wasn't magic or science. Some called them angels. To him, they were just smug assholes who thought themselves superior. He thought how Mab must have watched Sadie die. How she must have watched him pull the trigger. Anger smoldered within. "Nice to see you again, Mab. It's been a while." Mab shook her head like a pouting teenager. "Damn you, Hiram. You're always in the way." He blew smoke rings toward the ceiling. "I don't know about you, love, but I'm working." Mab said nothing, just glared at him. For a moment, he stared back. Those eyes. They belong to the girl from Jenny's. "I don't suppose I can convince you to leave." "It's my job, dear. I can't just pack off with things unfinished now, can I?" "Actually, you can. Go find some other abyss scum to kill. There's plenty out there." He sighed and set the whiskey on the floor. "Always a pleasure, Mab." His pipe now empty, he tapped its spent mix onto the carpet. "What the hell is going on?" Her lips pursed. "Hiram, you know I can't." "Bullshit!" He jumped up and jabbed a finger into Mab's face, aware he was threatening someone who could vaporize him with a nod. He didn't care. "Don't hide behind that fairy non-involvement shit." "Hiram, no. You broke your precious code the minute you interfered and dragged me from that alley. Now I want to know what's happening with these girls. Why were they killed? What's..." Suddenly weary, he sat down, alarmed at the way his heart hammered and his hands shook. He rubbed his eyes. "What's going on, Mab? Why, how are those girls connected?" She looked away, frowning. "It's simple, really. The girl from Jimmy's, her name is Therese, by the way, needs to die." "Oh, this should be good." Mab tilted her head. "How much do you know about the fairy, Hiram? You mean besides their taste for bondage and their unbelievable sexual stamina?" "Precious little." She gave him a harsh look, but he noticed a twinkle in her eyes. He filed that fact for later. "Besides that, hell, it's all based on superstition, myth, and legend." He waved. "You've been around since time began. You live somewhere past the veil. Sometimes you have visions, but they aren't completely accurate." He tapped his forehead. "Did I forget anything? Oh, right. Iron is your weakness. Kali knows why. Lastly, if the rest are like you, they're all hell in the sack. That's about it." "Impressive, Hiram. Really." Her smile twisted. "And actually, no, I'm not like other fairy at all. I'm chaste compared to most." Hiram sat forward. "Really?" She snapped her fingers. "Focus, Hiram. What I'm about to share is sacred." He mimed the zipping of his lips. "Stays with me, love, till death." quite. In any case, your general assumptions are accurate, though we have a more rigid hierarchy than that. I'm not just Mab. I'm Queen Mab. My bloodline goes back to the beginning. There have been many Mabs before me. There'll be more after. While all fairy draw their life force from the veil, the queens have it at their fingertips. It's ours to command. Hiram's mouth suddenly tasted dry. Ah, that I didn't know. He frowned. Wait, queens? There's more than one? She nodded. 5 others, 6 total. Powerful as you? All equal. Balanced. That's the way it's always been. We've no idea why or how. It just is. Interesting. Listen, thanks for the lesson. It's been fascinating. Really. But what the hell does it have to do with 5 dead girls and one who'll be dead He stopped and did the math. Oh, 6 fairy queens. Counting Therese, 6 human women. Balance. Something cold settled in his gut. Why? There must always be balance. Fairy queens aren't immortal. We die of old age. Extreme old age. Some are killed. Some step down. When that happens, the power must go somewhere. It must fill a new vessel. So these girls, they were waiting vessels for fairy power. Should a queen die? Mab nodded. Theoretically, if you were fast enough, or I was distracted, or maybe asleep, you could plunge an iron blade into my heart and kill me now. She eyed him. Possible, but not probable. Like hell. Given the chance, I'd kick your fairy ass. She stared at him, eyes shining. Hiram couldn't tell if she was amused, offended, or aroused. Someday, she whispered, I'm going to hold you to that. She composed herself and continued. In the unlikely event you killed me, my power must go somewhere. Right. So in your death, your power would go to my scion. They're scions of the fairy queens. Nice title. Spiffy. A thought struck him. Mab and Therese's eyes. Bloody hell. Therese is your scion, isn't she? The latest of many. Many? You've had more than one? Yes. Most often we queens outlive our human scions. The veil's power is bound inside them. They live mortal lives. In the case a scion expires, her queen must cross the veil and bring forth another. A sickening revelation struck him. Mab, is that what we were doing when we, all those years ago? He swallowed. Did you use me to sire a scion? Mab snorted. Hiram, please. With you, I had a scratch and itched it. That's all. She leered at him. And scratched it well you did, I might add. For a human. Focus, Mab. She chuckled and flicked her ponytail. Right. To birth a scion, a queen must cross over, choose a mate, assume the trappings of everyday human life. Which, doesn't include bondage dens in Texas, I'm afraid. I thought it was Montana. Like you'd remember. Of course, the relationships are always whirlwind romances. There's more time to replace a scion than a queen, but we don't have forever. You enchant the poor dupes? How utterly unsurprising. Mab's face grew serious. Actually, no. For whatever reason, the scions must be born of something like true love. Ah, that's why you and I couldn't have... Mab rushed on, but he felt sure her eyes flickered. And then, of course, because queens can't very well stay and raise a family, the unit is eventually dissolved. Yes, all those orphan girls. His jaw clenched. Lots of broken families to produce an heir. Collateral damage. Worth keeping the balance. Besides, something entirely different flashed in her eyes. We've all been through it. Scions ascend, change, and after that their previous mortal lives don't matter anymore. Somehow Hiram suspected she wasn't being entirely truthful. On this point, however, he kept his peace. She continued, in any case, uncalled scions grow up to be isolated women living solitary lives. They remain mortal, though their lives do shimmer with a dim reflection of the veil's beauty. Hiram thought hard. I see the crisis. Someone was either foolish enough or powerful enough to summon the Tanari to eliminate your bench, so to speak, so you can't call up reserves when needed. He frowned. A crude analogy, but it fits. Yes, it's alarming that someone discovered the scions exist at all. Her eyes flashed. No one is supposed to know they exist. Plus, they're protected. No one should be able to work a locator spell on them, much less bind something to them. How are they protected? Mab fingered the neck of her tunic, withdrawing a chain from which dangled a small charm. Hiram narrowed his eyes and inspected it. The charm looked simple, a silver circle split down the middle with a lightning bolt, an engraved book and quill on one side, 3 small crystals embedded on the other. Every child is left with a charm like this. They are specific to each queen's line. This charm is the sigil of Mab. There are wards that cloak the veil power bound within the scions. It's not working now because all the power that's flowed into Therese is too much for it to cloak. That still begs the question as to why it didn't work with the other scions. Interesting. According to Bothwell, all the dead girls apparently received medallions that were sigils of the Tanari. Focusing agents, I imagine. Probably strong enough to break the wards. That still doesn't explain how someone knew who they were so the medallions could be sent to them. No, it doesn't. I wonder, though. What? Hiram leaned forward. Well, it's strange. Why all the girls one night, then Therese the next? Something either broke the binding pattern and it had to reset itself, or... He shook his head. He'd come back to it later. As disturbing as it is, there are other, greater concerns. Hiram looked up too quickly and his stomach surged. He swallowed, fought back a wave of nausea, and said, I imagine this is where you try to convince me that Therese needs to die. Though I've got an inkling now. It's all about balance, isn't it? Mab hugged herself, looking ever more like an anxious teenager. Yes, just as there must be balance among the queens, there must be balance among the scions. Normally the situation isn't so dire. There's usually plenty of time to birth another scion or two. But you've never had this many missing scions before. This much loose energy. No. So too much power has been displaced. And there's not enough time to birth replacement scions, correct? Worse, because of its sheer volume, the power has flowed into the only remaining vessel that can contain it. Therese. What happens if Therese dies? Mab glanced away. Without a vessel to attract it, the power will remain trapped in the ether, safe, until a new cycle of scions can be started. However, the power now within Therese will soon reach critical mass. When it does, it'll break her binding. She'll manifest. Indeed, she's probably already manifested in small ways. What will happen to her? She won't be human, but she won't ascend either. She'll become something else. So what's the problem? I can sense evil, Mab. I know what darkness is like. You, of all people, should know that. She looked like a pretty generic kid. Even if she manifests fully, I can't imagine she'd become evil. She looked back at him and raised an eyebrow. You don't have to be evil to be dangerous. Besides, humans weren't meant to hold that kind of power. I know you think us smug, but the Faerie have been bred for this. She gave him an arch look. The Veil's power consumes and overwhelms. Given your mother's fate, you, of all people, should know that. His stomach twisted. Before he could respond, Mab continued. I've had a vision, Hiram, seen what's to come. Oh, well, excuse me. We all know how accurate those are. She looked at him with an odd glint in her eye. Would you care to see? Hiram sighed. Well, there's no way I'm going along with this on your word alone. Mab cut him off and grabbed his wrist, fingernails digging into his skin. Her touch burned. His eyes rolled back as the veil flowed into him. See then, Hiram Grange, see and understand. Chapter 13. Hiram thrashed. A rushing sound filled his ears. Everything else faded as darkness fell. See, Hiram Grange, see what I've seen, and tremble at the sight. Something exploded in the distance. Then he saw. The land laid to waste. Ground burning with white flame. Buildings burned to ashes. Rubble piled high amid swirling rivers of white fire. The liquid flame surged everywhere. In the distance he saw them, 3 figures suspended in the air. The sky around them churned with the same white fire. Things circled them, fantastic terrors that snapped and clawed and ripped at each other. They were shifting things of leathery hide, with blackened eyes and glass talons. He knew what they were, and where they'd come from. The abyss. He looked back to the 3 floating figures. One hovered in front, the remaining 2 flanked. The central figure burned with the veil. It all came from her, and he knew. She'd torn down the barriers between the abyss and the earth. Shadows concealed the figure on the left. The other, however, he realized in cold fear, was him, crackling with white fire. Far away over the hills, thunder rolled. He caught a glimpse of something white and hungry. When he looked back at the terrible floating trinity, he saw the most terrifying thing of all. Therese laughing over and over. Mab withdrew her hand. Hiram tumbled, but she caught him with one arm. His stomach clenched, he coughed, and things wriggled inside of him as Mab eased him back down onto the bed. He was so stricken by the vision he didn't have the strength to feel embarrassed. Thanks for that, Mab. Really. As if I didn't have enough nightmares rattling around in my head. What's one more? She didn't seem concerned. I'm sorry, but you wanted to see. She settled back onto the windowsill. Do you understand now? Hiram nodded. The image of Therese and the man at her side. Yes. That was me in the vision, wasn't it? Next to Therese. It was. Hiram shook his head. So, in other words, if Therese doesn't die before her power manifests, not only will she destroy the world, but I'll join her. Thanks for the trust. Still having sweet dreams of Sadie? Still willing to do anything to bring her back? His jaw tightened. Not for the first time he wished an iron blade near to his hand. How the hell do you... Don't dissemble. You're broken, Hiram Grange, even more so than usual because of what you did to Sadie. What would you become if offered the veil's power and could fulfill your every desire? A chill crept up his spine as he looked away. A monster. She sighed, sounding oddly regretful. The cruel fact is this. If you walk away now, as terrible as this sounds, Therese will be killed before she manifests. The Tannery will consume her, and the binding. Regrettable, yes. However, the power of the Scions will return to the ether, the cycle can begin anew, and the disaster will be averted. He raised an eyebrow. Excluding everyone who dies before then. I'm thinking large scale. Oh, of course, silly me. However, if you're not going to walk away, you must destroy the vessel. After last night, she'll trust you. Destroy the vessel, Hiram. Loose the power of the veil. Look, I'm no saint. Hell, I'm not even a good person. But that's monstrous. Walking away and letting those things kill her is terrible. But to wheedle my way close, gain her trust, then murder her? Mab's face hardened into a regal mask. You've seen what's to come. Hiram leaned forward, his neck tight with anger. I also know that your visions can be wrong, or interpreted differently. You're not omnipotent, Mab. Look, Hiram, this isn't a pissing contest. It's bigger than you and me. It may sound cold, but because you saved her, she's now a danger to us all. Let me get this straight. After figuring all this out, you're content to let the girl die simply because it makes things more convenient for you? This isn't about convenience. Someone knocked on the door, interrupting her. Mr. Robertson? Mr. Freddie Robertson? Package, sir. Damn. He shook his head. A courier would come now. Just his luck. To Mab, he said, Of course it's about your convenience. When it comes to the ferry, it's always about your convenience. Mr. Robertson. Another knock. Mab ignored it and continued to stare at him with her haunting eyes. He affected a yawn. You know, this has been great, but I've got work to do. Got to see a girl about destroying the world. As always, it's been fabulous gabbing, but Mab, you need to be off. Mr. Freddie Robertson. Hold on, I'm coming. He stood, but Mab moved and blocked his path with her shoulder, pushing back with surprising strength. What are you going to do, Hiram? An intriguing truth struck him. Well, I'll be damned. You're afraid, aren't you? Resentment burned off her. What are you going to do? His frustration emboldened him. Here's the thing, Mab. I don't trust you or the ferry. I never have, and I never will. Until this moment, you've largely left the Tannery and their summoner out of this. Why is that, I wonder? Are you suggesting that we bind these things to our own scions? That I'd help destroy balance? Mr. Robertson! A moment! I'm naked! With schoolgirls! Lots of them! Turning to Mab, he scowled. I've no idea. But you're not human, are you? I couldn't begin to guess your motivations. Either way, I'll keep my own counsel. I have a package for Mr. Robertson. Sweet Collie's tit! Shaking his head, he continued. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got things to do. Monsters to hunt, a talisman to find, a girl to save, and a fucking person at the door, who obviously can't tell I'm busy. In the interim, your prophecy can go to hell. He shoved her aside, even though he knew she would throw him through the window if she chose. All traces of emotion drained from Mab's voice as she intoned. So you're willing to doom all humanity to destruction, then? Mr. Robertson. He gave her a crooked, humorless smile as he grasped the doorknob. At least I'm human, Mab. That gives me more say than you'll ever have. Package, sir. His patience breached, he jerked open the door. Hell and damnation! What's wrong with you? Are you deaf or just bleeding? Standing to one side was a tall, thin man, bearing an eerie resemblance to himself. Dressed in a charcoal black suit, a similar though more modern cut, he stood rigid, hands clasped before him. Thin lips pressed together, and ice-cold blue eyes blazed at Hiram from under cropped, blonde-white hair. The loathsome Alphonse Klein III. But that meant he looked next to Klein and down. Dressed in a prim, neat gray business suit was a walking portrait of everyone's favorite grandmother, mound of gray curls and all. Mrs. Bothwell peered at Hiram quizzically through ornate glasses. Mr. Robertson, I do hope we're not intruding. Chapter 14. Therese stood in her living room. Sunlight streamed through the only open window. Dust and other particles hung suspended in the beam, paying silent witness to her wonderment and horror. It was her painting, the one shoved in the corner. Staring at it, clutching the dusty drop cloth that had covered the thing, she knew with lingering sadness it was a masterpiece no one would ever see. That's why she'd been unable to get rid of it, horrible as it was. Before last night, it had been easy to dismiss the painting and its implications, shoved in a corner, shrouded by the old cloth. Before last night, it had also been easy to dismiss her dreams as pure fancy and nothing more. Everything had changed. After retrieving the man's gun, she'd pulled the trigger with little thought. Somehow, despite her shaking arms and the weight of the weapon, she'd managed to hurt the thing that looked like Reggie. In the cool reason of daylight, it was amazing she hit anything at all, or hadn't accidentally shot the man instead. No, she'd shot true, as if an extra sense had guided her. She didn't even remember pulling the trigger. All she recalled was the strange certainty that she'd hit the target. And she had. She shot the thing's head, and it exploded. She remembered the man throwing up, thanking her, then passing out. The right thing would have been to help him, but she hadn't done that. She dropped the gun and ran. Her next memory was at a phone booth miles down the street, blubbering for a cab. Somehow she made it back home in one piece, where she collapsed into bed. She had no explanations for last night. In a fit of denial, she'd called Reggie's cell phone several times after waking, but it was out of service. She then called his work, but they'd received no calls from him either. Reggie was dead. Something had killed him, taken his shape, even his voice. Then, for reasons unknown to her, it had tried to kill her. So here she was, staring at that awful yet beautiful painting, the morning after the most horrifying night of her life. Where did she go from here? She gripped the drop cloth tightly. She'd always known she was different from everyone else, and not just because she was an orphan. Not because of her painting, either. Painting had been the medium she'd fallen in love with. She could have chosen anything: writing, music, chalk, clay. Her true talents lay not in her art, but inside her. There was no going back. She was different. Always had been. Last night something had wanted to kill her. A man stopped it. An ugly, almost repulsive man, to be sure, but a man who moved with a deadly grace nonetheless. According to the painting, he couldn't stop it forever. Maybe he was even the cause. Deep inside, in that way people sometimes have, she knew if she saw him again, he'd kill her. Hating it, but not knowing what else to do, Therese moved to pack her things for the only recourse left to her: running.